All right, so we're going to start doing some examples on this work. So the first example says the time taken, which is T hours, to travel from Sydney to Melbourne varies inversely. Get your red pen and underline that. With the speed S, kilometres per hour. Then it tells you if it takes 11.5 hours at an average speed of 80 kilometres per hour, find the variation equation for T. So we're going to go through and do our steps in our procedure. So our first thing is they've said varies inversely. Our first letter they mention is T. So we're going to write it like this. T equals K over, and then the other letter, S. Okay, now after that, that's the start of your variation equation, but the next step, remember, is to find K. And to find K, you need to have a T and an S value that go together. And that's why they've given you these two numbers here. So this is your time, and it is in hours like they wanted. So T is 11.5. And our S value is actually our speed, and it should be measured in kilometres per hour, and it is. So we can just use 80 for S. So now we're going to put those numbers into this equation. So in place of T, we're going to write 11.5 K over, and in place of S, we're going to write 80. And then we're going to solve our equation so that we can get the K by itself on the right-hand side. So we need to get rid of our divided by 80. So we're going to go to the other side, write down 11.5 down, and then we're going to do the opposite, which is times 80. So now I'm using my calculator to work that out and see what we end up with. And we get 920. Now, once you've got your K value, you're going to put it back in that original equation, and we end up with T equals 920 over S. So that is your final answer for your variation equation. That's all they've asked for. All right, now the question continues into part B. It says if the average speed is increased to 90 kilometres per hour, how long will it take? In other words, they're asking for time. Time's what they want to know. How long will the journey take? And the answer has to be in hours and minutes, and we'll get to that bit at the end. Okay, so we're looking for time. So we're going to start with our equation because this gets used for everything now. And they've given us 90 in kilometres per hour for our speed. So we're going to put 90 in for S. And then we go to our calculator and put that in. Fraction key, 920, down arrow, 90, and press equals. Now your calculator is going to give you that. That's not a very good answer for the time. So we'll use our SD key and change it. Now it says 10.2 recurring. Now if we wrote that down like this, our answer would be, time was supposed to be in hours, so that would be in hours. Now just leave it on your calculator. I haven't moved mine, it's still on there. Okay, now we want to give it in hours and minutes. So if we press this key here, there it is, 10 hours, 13 minutes, 20 seconds. Okay, so you're just using, to go from there to get there, you're just pressing this key. Okay, now they want it in hours and minutes, they don't want seconds. So we're rounding off to minutes. That's less than 30 seconds. So it's going to stay as 10 hours and 13 minutes. Okay, looking at C, starting with our same formula. T equals 920 over S. All right, now the question says find the speed. So S is what we're looking for to complete the trip in 10 hours. So the 10 is our time. So it's going in over here. And we have to solve an equation to find S. Now remember, when you have a letter on the bottom, of a fraction, we do the swap. I've taught you this before. So if there's a letter down the bottom, we're going to swap it with what's over here. All right, so we're going to have an S over here now because it's swapped. And we're going to have a 10 down the bottom. So if you go to your calculator and work that out, I'm running out of room, I'll just write it here. You'll get 92. And then on the end, whatever the units are for S for speed, which if you go back to there says kilometres per hour. Okay, now these next two questions are pretty tricky. All right, they're both hard, and I'll explain why they're hard in a minute. There's a little bit more you have to think about when you're doing it. All right, so let's look at the first one with the table. Now, it says find the variation equation. It doesn't say anything about whether it's direct or inverse proportion. No mention of it, but we can work this out. So I want you to have a look at what's happening to the x values. As we look along there, as we look that direction, we can see that x is going up. It's increasing. Now, if we look along the bottom, as we look at what's happening with the y values as we go along, they're actually getting smaller. So they're decreasing. So remember, if one thing goes up, the other thing goes down, opposites. So we know that this is definitely inverse proportion. Okay, so because we know that, we can start with our procedure. Now, we always start with our bottom letter, right? If the bottom letter is y, we start there. Okay, so we're going to start with y equals. An inverse proportion looks like this, and the other letter on the bottom, which is x in this case. Now, that's our start. We're finding k. So we need two values that go together. Now, there's 4 different pairs you could use here. That looks like a pretty easy pair of numbers. There's no decimals, so I might use that pair there. Right, so if I take this pair, I'm going to use x equals 5 and y equals 1. And I'm going to put them in my equation here. So in place of y, I'm going to put 1. In place of x, I'm going to put 5. And now I'm going to solve this equation to find k. So to get rid of the divided by 5, I'm going to come over to the other side and do times 5 and work it out, and I get a k value of 5. Now after I've done that, remember I have to put it back in this original thing up the top here, and we have y equals 5 over x, and that is your variation equation for this table. Alright, so there was a tricky bit just to start with. You had to work out that one was increasing, the other was decreasing. That means it's inverse proportion. Okay, now we're looking at a graph. Now in this graph we have A on this axis and B on this axis up here. So make sure you've labelled it correctly. Make sure you mark all these markings evenly spaced. Now we have a point up here, which is actually the point 1, 8. This next point here is the point 2, 4. And this point here is the point 4, 2. Okay, now they're important because we're going to be using them in a minute. Now, again, they've just said find the variation equation. They didn't tell us if it was direct variation or whether it was indirect. So, what do? Well, we look the same as what we did before. We're going to look at the A's and see what's going on as we increase with A, what is happening on the graph. So as you look at it from left to right, A is increasing in value. But what is B doing? Well, let's look at the graph. As you look from left to right, what is the graph doing? It's going down, right? So as A is going up, B is going down. So because that's happening, that means we're dealing with inverse proportion. and we're going to start our procedure. All right, now, when you have a graph, you always start with whatever's on that axis. Okay, so we start with that letter, whatever it is. All right, normally that's a y, and that's why most of our equations say y equals. Okay, so we're going to start with b equals. And it's inverse proportion, so we know it's k over. The other letter is a, so that's our start. Now we go through our steps. We're going to find our k value. So we need an a and a b that go together. Well, we can pick any of these 3 points on the graph. So I'm going to pick, I might pick this one here. So that's the point 1, 8. That means it's got an a value of 1 and a b value of 8. So that's what I'm going to use here. So let's put them both in. So b is 8. We don't know k yet, and a is 1. So now we're going to solve our little equation. Get rid of the divided by 1. Come over to the other side. And we're timesing by 1. Right, that works out to be k equals 8. So now we put it back in this equation, and we have b equals 8 over a, and that is your variation equation. So you could have used either of these 2 points instead of the one I picked. The answer still would have been the same at the end. So we're going to come back in the next video and do a few more examples.